Hola, yo soy Axel Bautista.
Hi, I'm Alex Garner.
And this is Ep6 American Beauty Podcast.
This is our sixth episode. Oye, who do you think you are? And this time we will talk about identity. Navegaremos sobre algunas de las fronteras de la identidad latina en los Estados Unidos. Latino, latine, Latinx, Chicano, Chicanx, or what it means to be Brazilian in a Latino community dominated by Mexicans. Let's begin with Jorge Cruz, a professor at the University of California in LA and an expert about Chicano studies.
My name is Jorge Cruz. I'm 31 years old, originally from Anaheim, California. So I kind of grew up in the Orange County area, Anaheim, Garden Grove area. I moved to Texas when I was about 12 years old. So I went to high school there, did my undergrad as well, where I studied journalism and literature there. I'm currently a PhD student in the Chicano Studies department at UCLA, and also a lecturer in the Chicano Studies department as well at Cal State LA. Both of my parents are from Mexico, so I grew up very much influenced with that culture. Like my first language, before I even learned English, even though I was born here, was Spanish, because that was the language that was primarily spoken in the household. So I would say, my mom was, my parents had lived there their whole lives, or practically their whole lives. So I grew up with listening to the music, watching the shows, and so I would say I was, grew up Latino or Mexican American. My experience with identifying as Chicano is something that came later in life, much later, perhaps in my mid-20s, when I actually went to grad school for the first time, and I took a Chicano Studies class for the first time. And that's the first time in my life that I learned about the history of Mexican American people, the contributions, the artwork, all the culture. Because before, I think I just identified primarily as Latino or Mexican American, just because I didn't really have that knowledge or history of Mexican American history or culture in this country. I guess culture, yeah, because I grew up with it, but it was never separate. I never distinguished being Latino with being Mexican or Chicano. So yeah, I would say that's something that came later in life.
Yeah. But why did you choose to call yourself Chicano? In your mid-20s, what?
My personal experience with coming to terms with identifying as Chicano came from my political consciousness and social awareness of what it meant to be a Mexican American in the U.S. Our shared history, our history of also struggle and resistance, that's rooted within the Chicano civil rights movement of the 60s, in which we, instead of identifying or trying to assimilate with this idea of whiteness within the American concept, we instead identified as being a mixed race, mestizos, being proud of our history, proud of who we are as people. And I think that's when I started identifying as Chicano, just because I understood my history and I was proud of that history.
There are still many people out there who don't even know what Chicano means. Mm-hmm. Can you give a very brief, I don't want to, but you're a scholar on the subject. Yes. So if you could give a sort of very brief overview of even what Chicano is.
Yeah, so up until the 1960s, Chicano was used towards Mexican Americans as a derogatory term, right? We think of something similar, as the term pocho. But Chicano, I think its actual origins are contested. No one knows exactly where the term came from. Some believe that it came from a Nahua term, but it also it's derived different meanings. So it was what was once a derogatory term that was used to label Mexican Americans in a derogatory way, in the 1960s was reclaimed as a term of empowerment, an identity category, to say that we're not fully American, but we're not fully Mexican. We're somewhere in the middle, and that identity is Chicano. So it's an identity of exploration, of kind of coming to terms with your who you are. And so I don't know if that's a simple term, but it's not a simple term. So I think maybe that's the best way that maybe I can describe it. Just reclaiming what was once a derogatory term as a term or identity of empowerment.
Like queer.
Like queer.
Like queer.
strength nowadays to use like to be called Chicano? Or like
I would say so, because there's, especially like some of my younger students who are like 17, 18 years old, when they identify as Chicano or Chicana, they identify because they understand the history behind the term, whether that was through their parents, through their older siblings, through maybe previous like classes that they took. It's something that they came to that term from like a political consciousness. So I would say it's still very much a political term, because if you identify that, it's because you identify with the history and politics behind that term as well.
So identity is a choice, right? We have to choose to take a word and apply it to ourselves. And for something like Chicano or queer, you have to put some thought into it. Right. But I think for me, what it's always so interesting is that it reveals the fact that someone thought about it. Yeah. Like they just didn't pick it up. You know, like gay is a really easy term to pick up and not have to really think about any complexity associated with it. But if you say queer, then it implies that you had to think about it. And the same with Chicano, it signifies that someone thought about using this term because it's a term that either people don't understand or it's expressly political. Yes. And it's meant to be expressly political. And so for someone to choose to call themselves that, it has that power. Exactly. Do you think it still has that? I mean, in the 60s and 70s, it certainly had a big charge in terms of the word and in terms of the movement. What do you think it's at now?
But I would say that, yeah, there's definitely a distinction between the politics of the 1960s and the politics of today, right? I mean, I always try to, when I introduce the concept, I put it within the context of like the Vietnam War. I put it within the context of like the larger movements of decolonialism around the world that was happening around the time. And for a lot of students, like they don't understand what the Vietnam War meant or what it means. They don't understand about this like third world liberation struggle. And just because they weren't raised, or they weren't born in that time, they didn't live during that time, and they weren't necessarily taught about that in the public school system. And so a lot of it's just, it's really just teaching the students like about like this important history. But I think because of that, there's also a lot of room for like redefining what that term means, because young people are redefining what that means all the time. So before, Chicano was also a very kind of nationalistic identity. It was also very, I would say, there was still a lot of machista in there. And now like the younger people in there, they've changed the term to like Chicanx, you know, to make it more gender neutral. And that's something that, you know, older people that identify with the term aren't necessarily comfortable with that. So it's interesting that you have that difference between generations and how they make the term their own, how they redefine it for themselves.
Me llamo Vlad, o ahora también uso Vi como nombre aquí, entonces mucha gente también me conoce solamente como Vi, pero uso los dos indistintamente y uso pronombres masculinos y neutros. En español, él, más que nada, entonces podemos estar en la conversación con él. Trabajo para el Centro LGBT de la ciudad de Nueva York, el cual es una organización sin fines de lucro, una organización civil, de la sociedad civil, que se encarga de, en general, mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas LGBT en la ciudad de Nueva York.
Tú, en temas pues étnicos o étnico-racial, como se le podría decir aquí en Estados Unidos, racial, no sé, ¿cómo te sueles referir a ti mismo?
Pues latino, creo que es como lo más común que uso en el contexto de Estados Unidos. Latino.
¿Latino? ¿Latinx?
No. No me gusta. No creo que hace mucho sentido en español. Entiendo por qué existe en inglés. Pero no entiendo por qué existe en español. Y creo que parte de las conversaciones que hemos tenido, por ejemplo, en el trabajo del que hablaré después y todo, o sea, es como nos referimos a las cosas desde una perspectiva de competencia cultural y desde cómo los hablantes de una lengua quieren hacerlo. Entonces, pues entiendo que existe Latinx aquí, pero a mí no me gusta realmente, entonces no hay una norma y estamos sacando cosas, entonces prefiero latines si hay que decir algo sin género o más allá de género, o sea, prefiero usar latine. En español también es lo que uso más en lugar de la X.
¿Y no dices mexicano?
Que si yo me identifico como
Sí.
mexicano. Sí, sí.
¿Pero latino o mexicano? ¿O latine o mexicano?
O sea, bueno, es interesante, ¿no? O sea, creo que yo hablo de que nací y crecí en México,
Ajá.
¿no? Creo que el tema de la identidad y de cómo me identifico es muy interesante y ha ido cambiando a lo largo de mi estancia en el país. No es que no me sienta menos mexicano, ¿no? O sea, soy mexicano, pero creo que aquí en el contexto estadounidense, o sea, ser latino es como, creo que bastante overarching, ¿no? O sea, en ese sentido, abarcador. Depende de la especificidad también.
Sí, sí, sí.
O sea, si estás hablando de formatos del gobierno, o sea, normalmente va a ser Hispanic, Latino. Si estás hablando de otro tipo de formatos, o sea, a lo mejor van a hablar de Latino, Latinx, Latine, o si estás hablando específicamente de nacionalidades, van a hablar mexicano. Y esa es la cuestión realmente, o sea, ¿dónde está la línea entre lo racial, lo étnico y lo nacional, ¿no? O sea, no son líneas que existen realmente, son líneas que existen arbitrariamente para controlar poblaciones, para numerar poblaciones, y en ese sentido, pues la fluidez con la que yo me identifico, pues creo que también tiene que ver con mi propia no conformidad en este sistema. Latino o hispanic no es una categoría racial, o sea, si los formatos no contienen esto, o sea, yo voy a poner otro o ninguno o cualquier otra cosa. Porque si no, o sea, es muy perverso esto, pero te ves obligado, y esto es algo que me pasó en algún momento al principio de llegar a este país, donde te ves obligado por ciertos formatos a poner que eres blanco, ¿no? O sea, porque no eres negro, o sea, no eres indígena, no eres asiático, y son todas las categorías que existen.
Estaba escuchando un podcast y sobre personas afro aquí en el sur de Estados Unidos, y entrevistaban a una mujer afro de Honduras, y ella decía, yo sabía que yo era de piel oscura y de alguna manera sabía que era pues negra, pero fue hasta que llegué a Estados Unidos que me supe negra tal cual, o sea, que supe que yo era afro y que era negra, o sea, como que nunca me había yo posicionado desde ahí hasta que llegué acá, o sea, como que la etiqueta, se vio forzada a usar esa etiqueta que nunca la había empleado en su día a día en Honduras.
Sí, pero aquí también no es negra o negro como oficial, es African
No,
American.
African American, ajá.
Yo creo que cuando me mudé a los Estados Unidos, yo soy de Venezuela. En Venezuela yo creo que nosotros no tenemos como esto tan marcado sobre de qué raza eres, y quizás creo que en otros países latinoamericanos tampoco. Quizás lo más que nosotros manejamos es como, bueno, eres moreno, eres blanco, eres trigueño, eres indio, qué sé yo. Cuando te mudas acá a los Estados Unidos, quizás comienzas a aprender ese tipo de cosas. Y por lo menos en mi caso, yo tengo familia morena, tengo familia trigueña, pero también tengo familia blanca, lo que significa que para los Estados Unidos soy afro-latino. Y es como aprender esa diferencia de que sí, que tengo familia negra, de que yo soy parte y que yo también soy negro, quizás a pesar de que no sea muy oscuro, de que eso también puede marcar una diferencia en los Estados Unidos de siempre. Es como que inclusive lo ves con latinos que quizás sean blancos, hay gente como que, pero es que tú eres blanco, sí, pero eso no significa que dejes de ser latino. Pero sí es como muy marcado que en los Estados Unidos cuando te mudas y aprendes esas diferencias.
No sé por qué, pero en los Estados Unidos latino no es una raza.
No.
Porque latino no es una raza.
Exacto.
Y en ese sentido, o sea, yo entiendo esto completamente porque es una
Pero
experiencia.
raza no existe.
No,
Exacto.
no existe. O sea, exacto. Es a lo que me refería. Son conceptos que no existen científicamente, pero sociológicamente existen y son bastante fuertes y son reales, ¿no? O sea, yo y cualquier persona que se vea como yo y cualquier persona que tenga la piel más oscura o un poco más clara tal vez, o sea, vamos a tener interacciones completamente diferentes con todo el sistema económico, político, social, cultural de este país. La invención de la raza sí es un fenómeno hasta cierto punto americano, pero no es un fenómeno nuevo, ¿no? O sea, es un fenómeno que significa control social y político, pero que en ese sentido se ha expandido, ¿no? Y no es que sea más o menos viejo que el capitalismo, pero es funcional al capitalismo, es funcional al control, a la explotación económica, política, social de ciertos grupos. Y yo mismo, llegando a este país, fue así como de, ok, entonces yo soy latino, que eso es como que más o menos ya desde México, digamos que sí hay una cierta familiaridad porque somos de América Latina, entonces como que es nuestra región y que nos autoadscribimos, me atrevería a decir, o yo al menos me autoadscribo como latino desde latinoamericano, desde que es diferente, ajá, y llegando aquí de repente es como, pues soy latino, latine, latinx, y aparte soy una persona de color, ¿no? I'm brown. Sí, sí. Es como de I'm brown and I'm a POC, right? Y es como que de repente tardas un rato en entender qué significa y dónde está tu lugar, ¿no? O sea, en esta jerarquía racial, o sea, que la gente lo identifica, creo que bastante acertadamente como un sistema de castas oculto, ¿no? O sea, al final de cuentas, es más o menos una alegoría que funciona, ¿no? O sea, tenemos diferentes castas de acuerdo a cómo la gente es percibida. En Estados Unidos, your race is your face.
For queer Latinx people, we're constantly having to formulate an identity based on our experience in the world around us, the government, racialization. But even as young people, as students, we're constantly thinking about who we are, how we fit in, how people see us. And as queer people, in particular, how do we define ourselves? What do we call ourselves? And for queer Latinx, all of the politics of the language that we use and our sexuality become an important part of our identity.
Algo que me hace, or something that I'm thinking about after everything we just heard. I mean, I know this is not something new, you know, and probably this is like a question I have for you. Like, how was it before, like, especially like in the Mexican American movement or like in the Chicano movement? How was it like for queer people to have a voice there? And I ask this because I think every new generation always thinks that what they are doing or the changes they're doing are actually new, you know, like it never happened before, you know, like we always feel entitled that this sort of queer revolution is new and we are sort of like pushing the boundaries and nobody did it before. I think that's like the most basic conclusions that many generations have. So that's why I'm asking this, because I believe that it wasn't like that before, that there was always like a fight there.
There's always a fight there. It's good for young people to have ownership of a fight and a movement. That's where the energy and the passion comes from. So it's great for them to feel that way. It's also equally important for them to know their history and that there have been queer people leading civil rights movements from the very beginning. And the fact that queer people were invisible is a demonstration of the homophobia that we endure even in the context of civil rights movements. And so we need to constantly remind ourselves that the people who came before us, we may not see them or read about them, but they were there. And they were an important part of these movements, even if they don't get that acknowledgement.
I'm pretty sure that in many, like, you know, like social movements, like anti-racist movements or environmentalist movements or whatever, like Chicano movements, there were always like queer leaders there that were not openly queer at that moment, but you know, after a few years later, they just like came out. And you know, recognizing that part of their queerness was also there, I think it's important.
But many of them didn't need to come out, right? Many of them were clear about their identity. They were just not seen. And movements around, I mean, even in Thailand recently, right? Like the movements in Thailand, the sort of anti-monarchist movements are being led by queer people and trans people. So all around the world, queer people and trans people have always been at the forefront because we have very little to lose. And we're on the outer fringes of power. So all of these things immediately impact us. And we lead these movements because it's so personal to our lives and our experience.
I'm David Perez. I live in Washington, D.C. I'm a gay cisgender man, Mexican American. I was born in the Los Angeles area, but came out as queer in Washington, D.C. So that's kind of where my queer family is. What else? I do a lot of volunteer work with LGBT and Latinx communities. So from DC Latinx Pride, Unión Hijos Fuerza Latinx Institute. So always finding a good cause. I also volunteer with the task force board and love giving my time back to the community and learning from like other folks to building community.
Younger people or people
who
don't know, what is Mecha?
So Mecha is, I don't know if I remember the whole acronym, like Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aslan.
Sí.
Yeah. So it's really big in the, California and the Southwest, right? All the universities have a chapter, right?
High schools.
High school
Mecha high school.
Oh my gosh, amazing. And on the East Coast, it was very different because there was not a lot of Mecha. There were not a lot of U.S. Latino studies. Even like public universities in the last 5-10 years got one in Maryland. So it was kind of cool finding other Mexican Americans over there. And I even remember it being like controversial because they were all closeted, right? And then we went to the East Coast Chicano Student Forum at Columbia. And there was like a queer woman who was leading it. And it was like this controversial thing that the straight Latino men didn't like this queer woman. And there were no like workshops on queer issues. And eventually all the guys came out at Georgetown, but everyone was like closeted.
I am Felipe Zabale. My pronouns are he and they. I am originally from Brazil. And I came to the U.S. when I was 14 years old. I live now in Orlando. I identify as non-binary and queer. I actually was listening to this like funny reel, like a comedian talking about exactly are Brazilians Latinos? And then she said, I created three questions you must ask yourself. And if you say yes to all three, you are Latino. So it was like, 1, has your mother beat you up with a flip-flop? Yes. Are you addicted to rice and beans? Yes. Did the United States create a dictatorship in your country at least once? Yes. So our identities are quite interesting because the idea of the Latino, Latinx, Latine, right? It's an American thing. Because when you're in Latin America, you don't think like that. When I lived in Brazil, I was Brazilian. I was Latin American. That's what I thought of myself. It was, it's so interesting to embrace a colonizer identity, really. Because they want to put us in some box. And then, we have to figure out where do we land. I've always seen the Latinx identity as a power-building identity. So I feel a lot of solidarity with other Latin Americans who live in the U.S. and who are back home. I see myself connected to a movement of freedom fighters here and there. So that's how I've always envisioned myself. And for that reason, it wasn't so difficult for me to just kind of like fall into a movement that's mostly Mexican. Most of the immigrant justice movement in the United States is Mexican. Because most immigrants in the U.S. are Mexican. And it's just a numbers thing, right? And I never really honestly lived until now at a place that had a lot of Brazilians. So I lived in Miami, and there was a little bit of a Brazilian community there, but it wasn't significant enough for me to be able to forge relationships and have many Brazilian friends. And I lived in New York, and it was similar. When I lived in Tampa, it was similar. Nowadays in Orlando, there is a lot of Brazilians here. Then because of that, I do have many Brazilian friends. But even so, quite honestly, my friend group is really diverse, skewed towards the Latinx side, which means most of my friends are still Mexican.
My name is Bruno Alcantara. I'm originally from Brazil. I've been in the U.S. for 10 years. I'm 10 years here. I can't even believe that. Definitely Latino coming from Brazil, right? South America. I came to the U.S. because I really wanted to learn the language 10 years ago. And here I am 10 years later. I'm American now. And a lot has happened. It was a big difference, a big change in my life by coming here. I have a group of Brazilian friends. We meet very often. We have dinners. We go out to, Brazilian events sometimes. And it's just very fun because those are people that they understand your culture, and the references we have from Brazil, and sometimes we miss the same things. We want to eat the same food. And it's nice to connect with people that are from your country, from your culture, they speak your language. How great it is to speak your language, and joke about it.
The Brazilians in the U.S., for the most part, came from the high middle class, which I am not part of. So I've never fully identified with them. I am like at a Brazilian event and then they start talking and I'm like, oh, you know what I mean? They talk about the maids they had. And I think, oh, that was my mother. She was the woman who cleaned your toilet. You know what I mean? There is a little bit of a class struggle that with me and other Brazilians, right? Now, obviously, not all Brazilians who live in the United States come from the high middle class in Brazil, right? And with them, I've been able to have a closer relationship because our experiences are so different sometimes that I haven't really truly identified with that piece, right?
I don't know if it's only Brazilians, but I know Latinos in general have this sense of family and community that is usually stronger, at least in our country. I think one of the biggest challenges we find when we get here is the culture is totally different. And there are a lot of really very positive things, and I think that's why a lot of us are here. I think, this American dream, this feeling that we are in a country of all possibilities, that we can achieve and get more than we probably could, or, things are more accessible, the quality of life can be much better than what we could have back in our country sometimes. I come from a really simple family, so at least for me, that's my reality. So it gave me more drive and desire, and, I think this whole thing is really positive. You just need to pay attention to not to be in a situation when nothing's ever enough for you, and that can make you really miserable. And I see that a lot. I've met a lot of people that they have so much, but they feel really miserable and not happy with what they have. So on that note, I think one of the greatest things about being Brazilian, and that I always try to bring back to my life, is this joy of life, this energy to be able to make the best with the least, and just enjoying life. It seems like just enjoy life and find the good things, and it became harder after the whole craziness in the world. So I think this joy of life, this energy. I think we have a really special energy.
You change when you come to the U.S., right? Like, I talked about individualism, even like the concept of personal space, right? All of these things are very important in American culture. And it becomes part of you because you live here. You know, like I've been living here at this moment. I mean, way longer than I've lived in Brazil. So obviously I am very influenced by American culture. And at the same time, because I am Brazilian, right? And I came to the US, so I still have memories of Brazil from when I was a kid. Like I'm not a dreamer that came when I was 2 years old, for example, right? Like the food, the music. Like today, I was actually driving my car, listening to Brazilian music and thinking, oh my God, I miss home. You know, like it's this, for me, it's almost like I'm not from here, I'm not from there feeling, you know, like in a constant struggle in my heart and in my mind. When I'm there, I'm very happy to be there. Like it feels so at ease, right? But the difficult things about Brazil are really difficult for me to deal with, right? Like violence, the lack of opportunity. I am not equipped really to navigate that. And it's, and I feel it when I'm there and I miss it here. But when I'm here, I miss it there.
Brazilians are usually sexually very liberal. They are more aggressive, what I like. I remember when I first moved here, I would go to a bar and I would try to kiss people. And they'll be like, no, I don't kiss. No, we won't kiss here. And I'm like, what is wrong? In Brazil, we just go and kiss. What is the problem? You know what I mean? It took me a while to understand that that's not how people do things here. In Brazil, you go in Carnival, oh my God. People just like grab you and they kiss you. So I think it's good. I like this energy too. I mean, it's all about balance, of course. But, sometimes here, people just looking at you, but they won't do anything. Or they may be interested in you, but I guess they need 60 days to realize that they're interested. So you need to wait for that. And they will probably, meditate on that. And one day they will decide that it's okay.
You change when you come to the U.S., right? Like, I talked about individualism, even like the concept of personal space, right? All of these things are very important in American culture. And it becomes part of you because you live here. Like I've been living here at this moment. I mean, way longer than I've lived in Brazil. So obviously I am very influenced by American culture. And at the same time, because I am Brazilian, right? And I came to the US, so I still have memories of Brazil from when I was a kid. Like I'm not a dreamer that came when I was 2 years old, for example, right? Like the food, the music. Like today, I was actually driving my car, listening to Brazilian music and thinking, oh my God, I miss home. It's this, for me, it's almost like I'm not from here, I'm not from there feeling, like in a constant struggle in my heart and in my mind. When I'm there, I'm very happy to be there. Like it feels so at ease, right? But the difficult things about Brazil are really difficult for me to deal with, right? Like violence, the lack of opportunity. I am not equipped really to navigate that. And it's, and I feel it when I'm there and I miss it here. But when I'm here, I miss it there. Brazilian culture is all about expression, and people think of it like, oh my God, they're loud, they're this, they're that, right? But really is all about living, embracing your feelings, your emotions, and then trying to figure out a way to express it in the world. And the second thing is about closeness, right? Which is that's the conflict between the American side of me and the Brazilian side of me. Because if you are in Brazil, you're at the beach, you just like turn around and you make a new friend, but not like a friend that you're just talking to that day. No, you're going to become friends. You're going to get invited to their cousin's birthday party. And it's very common. And over here, like I have to schedule time with my friends three weeks in advance. So we could go hang out and have a drink together, you know? So, you know what I mean? Like there is a culture that's really truly collectivist versus a culture that's so individualistic, and then living with one foot here and one foot there that's always clashing. You know what I mean? Like, it puts me in a conflict with myself sometimes.
Bueno, pues ya hemos llegado al final de este episodio. We just come to the end of this episode. And solo quiero agradecer a todos nuestros invitados, que bueno, en esta ocasión tuvimos muchos invitados. Muchas gracias a Vlad, a Jorge, a David, Bruno, Felipe, Chicky. Thank you guys, thank you all of you for like sharing your story, sharing your knowledge. Y muchas gracias por ser parte de este podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Join us each week for our American Beauty podcast. Gracias.
Adios.
Bye.